keeps me going. So I've got a little bit of a PowerPoint that I threw together based on kind of some pictures and photos of those conferences that some of them from around the world, and also from a blog that I wrote. So we can give you the link to that blog as well if you want to look at that. But the guts of it is pretty much in this. And then I want to finish with a little clip that I'm kind of bookending it. There's a quote that I love to start with that I'll show you, and then there's a clip that I'll show you that also reminds me of
nice to see
what
you.
I'm doing.
Hello.
Hello.
I think we had
Hi. Hello.
published in the same day that we need to get the hell out of here because we're going to lose.
Kate, we can hear you. All right, there's just now the dogs are all barking here. Okay, so I'll start this screen share and then we'll go into the clips. I'll try and keep a bit of an eye on it, the time as well, but Michelle can also let me know. All right, so everyone can see that? Yep, cool. So this is the quote that reminds me of how powerful we are in conversation and in having ideas. Like our ideas are so powerful and so important. And this came from an ABCD friend of ours in Queensland in Australia, Rick Thompson. He potentially got it from someone else, but it's Rick I know it from. They've been using it for years. And it's pretty self-explanatory about if one person spent a day having a conversation with two people about what they could create, and it continues to multiply. After 10 days, over 2,000 people would be in conversation. In 15 days, over 65,000. In 20 days, 2 million. And this is only the face-to-face conversations. This is not taking into account social media and the power of, the speed of Wi-Fi and internet. So this kind of keeps me going, is that I think, well, if I've just had a conversation with Michelle about that and she's like, yeah, that's cool. And then we talk to Fiona and she's like, yeah, I like that idea. And then there's someone else, there's going to be others. So let's just keep going and not say no, basically, and look at the strengths and assets in our networks that we can kind of draw on. So over the last, 4 years and 10 months, actually it's 11 months, and the travel that I've been doing, both with Michelle and other colleagues and on my own, and traveling around the world kind of not only doing this work, but also rediscovering my passion and my love, I guess, for what I do. And it was something that I would have had no idea I would have done, say 5 years ago. But I got to a position in my life where my children were all finished high school, and I was going to move out of the family home anyway. I'd been living with my ex for a couple of years while separated in the family home. So I took off and I said, you guys have the family home. See you later. And so they looked after it. And now they're all adults, of course, and spread all around the world. So that keeps me traveling as well. So with the practices that Michelle and I train in, we have ABCD, Art of Hosting, and also participatory co-design, which we've turned into this. This is what you come to us through, this participatory community building lens, where we blend and mash everything up. It's really tailor-made to what is needed, depends on the purpose, on the intention of the work that we're doing. So designing these international gatherings can be really challenging, as Michelle was saying, but it can also be really thrilling, can be really exciting. When you see, like we had our Southern Hemisphere call for the upcoming ABCD Online unconference in June, and all the South Africans joined, and there's some Indonesians, and we're like, hey, like it's really exciting. And the people want to offer their gifts and be part of that. So when I say we, it's generally Michelle and I. We've learned and developed ways to really effectively weave those range of strength-based approaches. And that's in our consultancy, our grassroots work, also in our training and facilitation, which is that third point, that we do have a deep understanding that facilitation, hosting and training are three significantly different styles. There's a bit of an example in that picture of what they are. The facilitation in the middle is when we're shifting from A to B. Hosting is that circle around it. We're hosting space. We're holding space for people to be able to be in that, whatever it is. And then the training is around the outside, where we're actually doing a bit more of the practical describing, demonstrate, doing and discuss, which come into the others too. They weave in and out of each other, but they are significantly different styles. So in designing these international gatherings, I started thinking about what are the kind of key points. I wouldn't want to call them key themes. They're not phases or stages because they're not linear. They happen in all different order. I mean, there usually is a starting point, and at the end we celebrate. Maybe they're the only bookends. But there's all this other stuff in the middle that goes backwards and forwards. So we're going to go over just a couple of those. So powerful questions are really important, and we're going to talk about that a little bit. There's the core group or core team or host team, whatever they decide that they're called. There's a conversation with them to have as well. There's design, detail, and layers. So there's, for anyone who was part of our conscious co-design session that we hosted, I don't know, 4, 5, 6 weeks ago, there's all these different elements within those different layers, the practice, process and principles and patterns. So then there's community design thinking, like what does that look like, which leads us more strongly to co-design. Design thinking came out of more of the corporate world, where they were design thinking around a particular product, and co-design lends itself more to our community work. And then there's the magic. I'll talk about that. The magic goes from me to we, and we have to remember to celebrate and breathe. We kind of have to breathe throughout the whole thing. And that picture was at the ABCD in Bizo in South Africa, 2018, I think it was. So in the beginning, whenever someone says to me, calls me or contacts me or emails and says, hey, we want to host a community conversation, or hey, we've got this problem in the area and we'd like to get some local community around this and have a discussion, or can you come and facilitate a conference? So anything from a general conversation to a forum to a more formal style conference, which I usually try and talk people away from, doing that more traditional, speakers at people. We try and move it much more participatory than that. Sometimes have to negotiate that a little bit. But some of the questions that I would first then ask that person who's contacted me is, tell me why. Tell me more of the story about what brought you to this point that you want to do this. And some people will say, well, we have an annual conference every year and we've heard you do something different. I'm like, okay, cool. Tell me, what do I do different? Or what is it that you're actually expecting? So we can still dig into that. Or people might say, I don't really know what we want, but we want to talk about inclusion in our community and what that looks like with the rollout of the new government policies or whatever it might be. I ask them if they see an end goal or outcome. What do they hope to gain? And I'm really, really hoping at this point that they don't give me a tick list of stuff. That, they do say things like, we hope to strengthen relationships and get people into deeper dialogue. Sorry, there's dogs barking in the background here. So then asking those people, would you be willing to join the core team or the organising team? Michelle and I have a thing about we never do this alone. We don't go in and just facilitate these as an external person. We want a local team. So we want to find out who are those movers and shakers, what's the local knowledge and wisdom, who can bring their experience and skills in. And that, you know, ties into, of course, the ABCD, what can you offer? We have a discussion about, well, who's not around the table? And generally it's community. If it's a service or organisation who's kind of reached out, generally it's community is not there in the centre. So we really work on that and say we need community in the centre of this. There have been arguments against that, saying that this is a practitioner conference. And we're like, yeah, okay, who do you practice on? Let's get them in here. So, you know, it is about having community at the centre, very, very importantly. So who's already talking about this topic? And it could be in any sector. It could be, if it's about homelessness, it might not just be happening in this sector. There might be something happening in the banking sector, whatever it is. So who else is talking about that? Then who are the movers and shakers who might also have a keen interest to be involved? So I was saying about the locals. And who are the people currently affected? So if it was a community conversational forum around homelessness, then who do we know that we can invite in who has either been affected by homelessness or is homeless in a very respectful way, of course. So then we usually have a second conversation. So that's when the core group would come together. And the focus here is really on the what and the how. We want to really focus on what matters here. A local groundwork team is always organised by the local host. What Michelle and I are doing is more of the high-level design, the sensing in, the sometimes making people uncomfortable with difficult questions, which is perfectly all right because it pushes people through some stuff, some assumptions at times. And then we talk about the groundwork team. Here's some of the things you might need to do, and there could be others. So we get their feedback as well. So with the community questions, we always look at strength-based questions like appreciative, inquiry focused, and thinking of what's in it for them? Why would they come? Why would they come to something if all we were talking about was theory? What is it that we really want to invite them into? What are we sensing into is needed here? What are we hearing that is happening in the local community that is important to focus on? So instead of then it just being a service or organisation has a great idea for a forum or something, we're actually asking them to sense in a bit more. And for any of you who have been in our trainings, you will know that we do that for training as well. We will sense into what is the calling question, what's being asked for or invited here. Designing with the community, not for the community, is important. That's why we want to make sure all stakeholders are involved. And then looking at an underpinning framework with the purpose and outcome, we might use different frameworks. We've got a couple that Michelle and I use that tend to hold quite well for almost everything. One is the breadth pattern or the divergent, emergent, convergent. The other one is theory U or the shape of the U. And both those patterns, and they can overlay on each other, but they tend to hold quite well. There's a couple of frameworks like in ABCD, like Mike Green's learning conversations that can hold a good framework as well. And then the tools and processes that we're going to lay on that framework. What are the most participatory and useful for the context that we're in? Is World Cafe something that's useful for the context? Or actually should we be doing a learning conversation, which is ABCD style? Like we can really sense into what we're hearing from people that will help us create the design of what's needed. About the only bookends we make sure we do is the check-in and check-out, that we will always do that. Anything else in the middle can change in a heartbeat. We're always open to flexibility and being adaptable, and let emergence run free. But we can also do that with a really light touch framework. So that's where we will still put some tools in some kind of frame. The magic and the harvest. So the magic is this in the flow, it's this tipping point. And I just love it. And it happens twice. So the magic or the tipping point in the design team, so the core team who we've got there, there's this wonderful thing that happens. And it was a beautiful example with the South African Imbizo, where Michelle and I were giving instruction, information, and this is how, and this is what it looks like. We created the design and got their input. And then there's this magic moment where the penny drops for the collective and they all go, right. And then they start moving stuff around and go, what about this? And this is how we can strengthen that question. And what about this person? And I'll contact him. Oh my God, and we need them. And Michelle and I can lead by stepping back then. So then we're holding the container, and it's a magic point. So that's in the design. That also happens at the event. There will be some kind of tipping point where people get into the flow and they go, aha, I see where we're going here. I'm in. So there's this wonderful moment, and you need this eagle-eyed view to be able to watch out for that. Then the outcomes and the harvest is we plan the harvest before we start. This is not something that we get to the end and go, okay, what happened? Let's write a report. The harvest starts with the first call with that hosting team. We start then. If you're taking notes about something, you're already harvesting. So we're already starting to build that up. So from the beginning and middle right through to the end. And we need it to be community owned and led in whatever capacity that is of what you're doing. I love this quote from Harold: the wisdom of the community always exceeds the knowledge of the experts. So if we can hold a really light touch framework for the wisdom of the community to be lifted and strengthened and nurtured, and we can do that leading by stepping back, then we're on a winner. You know, we're not coming in as the expert at the front going, this is what you need to know and do. So the power of community. So very, very important. And I think this is photos from the UK. Oh, no, from South Africa, from Greece. The other one, South Africa. But the power of community is it reframes and reshapes the outcomes of a conference that was intended for practitioners or for services or organizations. The power of having community there in the center changes stuff. And just a quick example, Paul Bourne from Tamarack Institute tells a story about when they were looking at, they did like a 4-day hosted conversations in Toronto around homelessness. And he said having people with the lived experience there was so powerful because they were there at the center, because people had had conversations around homelessness for years before, for decades, right? And that would be services trying to fix, or people trying to do the best they could, even if it was from a strength-based approach. And he said he watched these corporate type people and bankers at one of the World Cafe tables sitting there, who he knew they had said things like before, like, oh, the homeless people just need to get a job. They need to get off their ass and get a job. And he said he watched them sit at the table with a woman who was suffering from homelessness. And she was saying, I've been living in my car for a year with my 3 children. I send out 100 resumes a week. I am trying my absolute best, and I just can't get a break. So that was just one example from this forum that went over 4 days with hundreds of people. And after that forum, because then they had the movers and shakers in the room, they had the key stakeholders, and within only a few months, they had moved thousands of people out of homelessness because they were tapping into the local businesses, the skills, the assets, the resources. Everyone had some buy-in. Having that community at the center is just so, so powerful. We need stories, we need that connection, and we need that reality. So I think this is my last one. So just thinking, never work alone. Michelle and I remind each other of this. We had a couple of times last year, I think we did some jobs on our own, and afterwards we rang each other and went, that was really weird. It was really weird. So try not to work alone. Those times where Michelle and I have worked alone, and we know from our post conversations, say with someone who asked me to just come and do some ABCD training, I'll still say, who's the locals who are doing this? Do you want to present anything? Do you want to share your skills? Is there still something you want to do? So it's really important that, like the quote there says, what can we do together that I can't do alone? So how can we invite people into that? And like I said there, it might only take one person to say to me, hey, we should find like-minded people to talk about this. But it takes many friends and colleagues to bring this event to life. I won't read out that last one. And a couple of quotes, and I'll tell you about this picture in a second. So I love that one from the Dalai Lama. If you think you're too small to make a difference, try sleeping with a mosquito. And then Anthony, who's a mate from the Jeder Institute in Nova Scotia in Canada, and he says participation without ownership is just good theatre. So we don't want to have community there at the centre because they're just playing a good part or playing a nice role. We actually want them in there with ownership, which is why we need to involve them in the core team from the beginning. Have them in as part of that. So this is where it's taken us. We've got India up the top. We've got South Africa at the side. There's a whole lot of other stuff in between. And the ones in the corner. And hey, look, Wendy, you're sitting on the same lounge as in the photo. And this is one that we're co-creating now with, I think we've got almost like 50 people on the planning team for the ABCD online conference in June. And everyone is welcome. Like, just send me an email if you want to be part of that. Everyone's welcome. I sent out the information to like 6 more people today.
What?
So I want to show you this is my other bookend. This is my favorite clip, and I'm going to share a different screen because I didn't have time to embed this. Where are you? Here he is. So this is Placido Domingo, and I can't pronounce the conductor's name. Nope, not even try. Almost tried. Anyway, it's only a 3-minute clip, so, well, it's just under 3 minutes. So I want you to watch it, and I want you to think of it or listen to it or watch it through the lens of the power of listening, of sensing in, and watch how these two interact. It is just magic. And the way that we need to sense in and listen to what is happening in community is all over this. It'll make me cry. It does every time. Here we go.